Hi everyone, my name is Sarah and welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be bringing you my mid-August wrap-up. August is about half over at the point of me filming this, and I have currently read 9 books so far, and I thought maybe I should do a wrap-up video for those. And you know, now that I'm doing it, I'm kind of worried that I'm going to film this and then not read anything else for the rest of the month. So I participated in the Readathon. That was the Canadian-based readathon, which I'm just going to kind of dive right in and just kind of get going. I read a lot of really awesome books this month so far. I really enjoyed all of them. I read quite a variety of books so far as well, which has been super awesome. The first book that I read was I've Been Meaning to Tell You by David Chariandy. This is a nonfiction. I really enjoyed this. It was really beautifully written, and I also really admired the way that he wrote this letter, as though it wasn't so much a sort of roadmap of this is what you must do, this is how you should react, this is how you should feel. It was very validating to his daughter and understanding that his daughter is going to have different experiences, which I really liked. And I just think David Chariandy is a fantastic writer. So I ended up giving this 4 stars. Another nonfiction book I read was We Have Always Been Here by Samra Habib. This is her memoir of kind of how she navigated the different intersections of her identity and kind of came to terms with who she was and her journey to get there and reach that acceptance. I really loved this book. As a queer woman who was raised religious, like, it really did resonate with me in a lot of ways. And so I really admire her for writing it. I also really liked her writing style. If you watched my vlog from the Readathon, which I will link below because this is a shameless plug, I said a couple of times that it felt like I was having a conversation with her, where like the way that she wrote her story and this memoir, it felt very conversational, like I could be a part of this conversation. Even though it's a book and it's one-sided and she's telling me her story, it still felt like there was room for me to respond in a way. It was really weird. I've never had that experience before, and maybe just because it resonated a lot with me, that I just felt like I could have this conversation with her in this particular way. I really loved this. I really enjoyed how like upfront and frank she was about a lot of things, and how it took a while for her to come to accept her queer identity. I really liked that. I don't think there's enough of coming out stories that happen a little bit later in life, and so I really enjoyed this one. I ended up giving this one 5 stars just because it resonated so much with me that I kind of want to reread it very, very soon and like annotate it and really dive a little bit deeper into this when I have a little bit more time to read it. So I loved this one. Another book that I read for the Readathon was a graphic novel called A Girl Called Echo, The Pemmican Wars, and that's by Katherena Vermette. It's the first one. I only read the first one, and it's sort of a series where this girl named Echo is transported back in time when she dreams, and so she's kind of exploring and learning about the history of the Métis people, which are Echo's ancestors, and sort of learning about that side of herself. It was a really solid setup. I liked that it seems like Echo can kind of control when she goes back in time. At least that's what it seemed like for this first one of the series. I like that it's tied to the present and her understanding her history and the way that the Métis people have lived, and you know, their sort of story. And I also just really liked Echo. Like, she was very sweet, and we didn't get a lot of time with her yet, but I am very interested in reading and kind of continuing on in this series and sort of seeing how this all plays out. I gave it 3 stars, which I know sounds bad, but like, it was really good. It was very solid. It was a very good work. A little bit of a story was missing, but it's part of a series. So I think if you read the whole like series or multiple ones in the series, that rating would go up. And also the art style was absolutely beautiful. I really, really liked it. It was just really beautifully done. The next book I read was The Marrow Thieves by Cherie Dimaline. This is the sort of dystopian, sort of futuristic story where everybody who is not an Indigenous person has lost the ability to dream, and everybody else has discovered that if they use the marrow, like the bone marrow from Indigenous people, they can kind of cure themselves of their inability to dream. Obviously that leads to Indigenous people being hunted and kind of mined for their bone marrow. This book follows Frenchie as he is separated from his brother and tries to survive in this wild environment, and kind of like falls into this family, you know, he found family, and sort of as they navigate both their pasts and their presents and future. I did really end up liking this one. I had a little bit of trouble with it at first, and I think it was more so my issue than the book's issue, where I was expecting to be able to read this a little bit faster than I did, but it is a book that you sort of might have to sit with a little bit, and I just wasn't anticipating that, so I felt like I wasn't into it when I was. It was just taking me a little bit longer. I really liked a lot of the characters. I liked the way that it wove everything together. I also really enjoyed the writing. I think it was really, really solid work, and I did like reading it and really falling in love with a lot of the characters, and the sort of story that was crafted was beautifully done. So this book got 4 stars as well. Then we have The Hanging of Angelique by Afua Cooper, and the full title is The Hanging of Angelique, The Untold Story of Canadian Slavery and the Burning of Old Montreal. And so this is a historical book. It's not a historical fiction. Afua Cooper details the last bit of this woman, Mary Joseph Angelique's life, who was a slave and was executed when she was 29 for starting the fire that ended up burning down Old Montreal. And so Afua Cooper relies a lot on the historical documents from the trial and subsequent court dates to sort of paint a picture of Marie Joseph Angelique, and also uses the wider and broader historical context surrounding slavery in Canada and in the surrounding areas, and really tries to paint a picture of how and why Angelique kind of got to this particular point in time and in this place, and then also really talks about why she did what she did. And the thing that I liked the most about this is that even though there's a lot of historical details and conversations about slavery in general, Angelique is never far from the focal point of this book, where she's still very much front and present. And while we're discussing lots of different things, Angelique's story and her agency within her own story is still at the forefront of every single conversation. So I really liked that aspect of it. I liked that Angelique didn't get buried or lost in the parts of that were very historically, that were, she didn't get like lost or buried in this parts that were very historically dense. I also really, really liked that Afua Cooper herself really points out the flaws in the thinking that Angelique only did what she did out of love, that she was in love with this man and wanted to leave to be with him. And she really points out why that's really damaging, and why that really just ultimately takes away Angelique's agency in her own story, and kind of excuses away the horrors of slavery in and of itself. And I really liked that she really talked about that and made a point to reference that and mention it, because that is something that is ignored a lot of the times in a lot of sort of stories similar to this, but are not necessarily this. This was one of the best things that I've read in a very long time. While it is incredibly dense with historical context and facts, it doesn't feel overwhelming, or you don't really get lost in the weeds of the history of it all. It still very much reads like a story. It still reads very easily, and everything is connected in a way that you can see it all, so you know why you're reading what you're reading. I gave this 4 stars because I really loved the way that Afua Cooper wrote. I think she did a fantastic job throughout this entire piece, and I would highly recommend this book for people who are interested in this topic or potentially learning more about this. It was just a really fascinating thing to read, and I just really enjoyed, I just really appreciated Afua Cooper's writing and the way that she told the story that she did. And then the last book that I read for the Readathon was Bone Black by Carol Rose GoldenEagle. This is the story of Ren, who is struggling after her twin sister Raven she mysteriously disappears, and there's a thing going around where a lot of Indigenous women are being taken and disappearing, and the police are not really doing anything about it. And it's through the loss of her sister that Ren kind of starts to find herself in a way where she is sent on, where she starts to believe that she's sent on this quest for justice by different spirits and godlike beings, and sort of starts trying to take justice into her own hands. It was honestly a lot darker than I thought it was going to be, but it still was written very, very well, and I believed in the story that was being told, if that makes sense. And I also really found it like hauntingly beautiful at times, where there's a lot to unpack in this book. There's a lot to think about and understand, and there's a lot of kind of questions of morality and what is right and wrong, and how we sort of, what constitutes right and wrong when the law is not totally on your side at times. I really ended up loving this one. I really liked Ren as a character. I fell kind of in love with her. I loved her relationship with her husband. I love that even though she's grieving throughout the entire book, it's still, the passage of time felt very real. The ending is very ambiguous at times, so for people who might want something tied up very neatly, this book does not do that, but I think the ending really suits the tone and the narrative that was being told. So I ended up giving Bone Black 5 stars. So those were the 6 books that I read for the Readathon, and I really liked them. They were super great. I still have 2 more books to go. So the next book I read was Take a Hint, Dani Brown by Talia Hibbert. This is the second book in her Brown Sisters series, and the first book that I have read from this series. And when I tell you that I fell in love with Zephyr, like, immediately, I mean that, like, literally. So this is a story of Danica and Zephyr, and they are kind of friends who are attracted to each other, and through a sort of miscommunication viral moment, people assume that they are together, and Zephyr decides to ask her to pretend to be his girlfriend so his Charity can kind of use this momentum a little bit. And obviously nothing can go wrong with that when 2 people are super attracted to each other. Just kidding. A lot of things went wrong, but it was so incredibly cute. Like, it was an adorable story. Like, the characters were amazing, so well-rounded. And my favorite thing is that Dani says from the very beginning that she does not want a relationship, that she doesn't do relationships, and Zephyr's really respectful of that, and so he kind of resigns himself to knowing that this has an expiration date, even though he's upset with that. And I really absolutely loved that he allowed her to kind of set that term and didn't try to force her to change her mind or anything like that. I loved Dani as a character. I loved that she worked through some of, like, her own insecurities, and that she was learned, and that she got, like, a great moment in her career. Loved that. And Zephyr just owns my entire heart. He is one of the sweetest characters I've ever read. He reads romance novels, and he's just a massive romantic sap, and I love him. This book was so entertaining. It was so enjoyable. It was adorable, and the romance was so great. I absolutely loved this book, and I don't typically read contemporary romance. I just sometimes find it a little bit unbelievable, and it sometimes can feel really stilted for me, and that's why I also don't really watch a lot of rom-coms, but that's neither here nor there. That's absolutely not the case for this book. It was enjoyable, and it was entertaining, and I loved it. And I think a big reason why I loved it so much was purely because Talia Hibbert really took the time to develop the 2 main characters first, so we really knew who they were before they got into this fake relationship. So when they started to do things or act different ways, it felt very real to these characters. It felt very true, and so I loved that. And I am going to try to read the first book in the series, and obviously anything else that comes out for this series. I absolutely loved it. I thought it was really fun, really cute. Highly recommend. Another 5-star read. And the final book that I have read so far this month is Kings of the Wyld by Nicholas Eames. So looking at this book cover and reading the tagline, "The boys are back in town," and understanding that it's about an all-guys kind of mercenary band, it's not really my cup of tea at face value. So when I tell you that I read this book and I absolutely loved it, that should say something. This is the story of this mercenary band called Saga that used to be really famous and super popular because they were amazing at everything that they did. Has been disbanded for quite a few years at this point. I think it's been over 10 years or so. And they each have kind of gone their separate ways. So at the start of the book, we're kind of seeing where all these 5 different men have ended up and what they've been doing with their time since they disbanded. And the general story is them getting back together to go and rescue Gabe's daughter, who is trapped in a city that's under siege. This book was so enjoyable and so entertaining. I was laughing along with it. I loved all of the characters. I loved the hijinks. All of the characters were really, they were all standout characters. I felt like they were very real, very fleshed out, very enjoyable. Like I found myself rooting for them all, obviously. Like that's what you want in a story. And I just found the relationships between them all very, very interesting as well, because they each had a slightly different relationship with our main character, Clay, who's called Slow Hands. and it's because in every fight he tends to get hit first. Like he can't block right away, and which is just so funny. I love that is the nickname that stuck. Anyways, but yeah, the characters are really good. The relationships felt really developed and thought about, where like, while you have a big friend group, sometimes different people have different intensities of their relationships. The side characters were also really, really good, and even though there were some that I hated, I also felt like, but they still felt like real people. Like they didn't feel like caricatures, if you will. The world itself was very, very fun, and there's not a ton of world building, so this is a really good fantasy for people who get really intimidated by large, high fantasies or epic fantasies, and it is also a standalone. Now, there is a sequel, but that sequel follows a different band of mercenaries, which I will be reading soon, hopefully. So I would recommend this for anybody who is interested in fantasy or likes the idea of fantasy but gets very overwhelmed or intimidated by epic fantasies or very, very chunky fantasies or fantasies that deal with so much world building. It just feels like info dump after info dump. This is definitely a book for you then, because it does not do that at all. And it's very character driven as well. I thought it was an entertaining ride from start to finish. Another 5-star read. I have read some great stuff so far this month, you guys, and I'm like, I still have a couple books left on my list, and I'm hoping that they hold up just as well. That's it for me in this wrap-up video. Let me know in the comments below if you've read any of these books and what you thought, or if there's any books you might pick up now that you've heard my glowing recommendations, because I think all of these books were winners. Like this video if you liked it, subscribe to my channel if you want to see more of my content, and as always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope that you have a fantastic day.